Hello everyone, my name is Void Doctor, and if you've been on this channel for any amount of time, you probably know I really like to build cities, towns, villages, all of that in a medieval style. And over the years, I think I've accumulated a lot of cool tips and tricks for improving your cities. So in today's video, we're going to be learning how to take a big piece of land like this and turn it into a giant medieval city. And so starting us off, folks, this is a really great spot for building a city. As you can see, we've got a nice flat piece of land up here. Maybe we'll do a bit of terrain smoothing on it in a minute, but we've also got a river running alongside here, which for a medieval city is almost a necessity at this point. And it does open up into some ocean over there, so you could do something cool with that as well. And if this is your thing, we've even got some cherry wood. But as I mentioned before, even before you get planning anything for your city itself, you're going to need to do some work on the terrain. There's a couple of places in this terrain where I feel like we could cover up some ravines and things, so let's do that now. So anything that looks unnatural in your terrain, anything that looks overly artificial, you'll want to cover up with dirt and grass just to smooth out your terrain and make it look a lot more easy on the eyes. Alright, so I've smoothed out a lot of the terrain here, filling in a lot of ugly holes and ravines, but one thing I wouldn't smooth out is these sort of steeper hills, because you can actually create a really cool effect with them, sort of visually dividing your city up into different districts. Because let's say up top here is neighborhood marked out in yellow here, and this white wall here just marks out a retaining wall. So sort of you cut out this part here, this part of the hill here, and make it a lot more steep. And then let's say the red neighborhood is down here, so we just got a building here. You can use that retaining wall there to make the height increase a lot more steep, visually separating the two neighborhoods with that big height difference. But before you get planning out any retaining walls or anything like that, you're going to need to plan out where your big, wide boulevards are going to be. And so I'm going to mark these roads out in red, and I kind of want the city center to be right on top of this hill. So we're going to hop into third person, and I'm going to show you how to mark out the roads right now. So when you're planning out your roads, I always recommend using dots instead of just full lines of wool. A, because it saves you some time cleaning up the wool, and B, because it gives you a bit of freedom in the way you want your roads to look. All right, so as you can see, our two roads meet right here on top of this hill, and you might be able to notice that the markers right here are a lot more dense, and I'm using this to sort of signify that this is going to be a lot more windy and just a lot more tight turns in the road, which can make it feel a lot more atmospheric and dense down here. And we're just going to assume that you have some sort of harbor built along these cliffs here, and that most of these roads are going to either end up in the hills back there or on the harbor down here. And so now that you have your major roads planned out here, you want to sort of think about what neighborhoods are going to be where. So I kind of want this lower section right here to be a fishing area, a marina district, maybe even like a dockyard. And so I'm going to mark this out in red wool. We'll call this the marina district. And up here on this stretch of coast, I want this to be the waterfront district. So maybe this is more, maybe people coming in from afar. There's a lot of shops here, a lot of restaurants, places to find food, that sort of thing. And we'll mark this out in blue wool. And then right on top of this hill here, I want this to be the downtown area where all the action's happening. There's gonna be a lot of government facilities here, and also just a lot more buildings, that sort of thing. And we'll mark this out in yellow wool. And then down here where the road starts to get more windy and we get a little further from the downtown district, I want this area to be more of like a quieter residential area, so a little bit less nightlife and a lot more housing. And when I say this is a residential district, I don't mean this is where all the housing is. I just mean this is going to be primarily housing. We're not going to have a lot of like dockyards down here or anything like that. And then back here up on this hill with this beautiful view of the entire city, I want this to be more of a fancy district. You know, a lot more wealth back here, the houses are going to be bigger, that sort of thing. And we're going to mark this out in orange. And then because I want this to be a survival friendly city, down here back past this hill, I want this to be a villager district. And so now comes the fun part of planning, filling in these districts with buildings. And so we're gonna hop into a bit of a third person time lapse here, and I'll explain to you my thought process once I'm done with it. So when you're planning a project as big as this, I always recommend starting with wool, because it makes it really easy to make changes, and you really want to be able to make changes. As you can see here, I actually ended up changing the way the streets looked. They were originally going to be big, wide boulevards, or at least the main few streets, but I ended up making them more narrow just to sort of fit the vibe I was going for. Okay, I got all this wool laid out here, and as you may be able to tell, none of these plans are just big squares. They all have something interesting, whether it be some form of diagonal element or a big tower somewhere on them, and that just adds so much interest. For one, it makes the buildings look a lot more interesting, and two, it makes it so your streets aren't just straight on the cardinal directions. It makes it so they're a lot more windy, and this just makes your streets feel a lot more exciting, a lot more interesting. But there are a lot of other ways you could do this. So for example, on Infinity Craft, my main city, it doesn't actually have very windy streets, or at least not the big streets. So what I decided to do was add some big open courtyards along the city with fountains and things in the middle, and I just plan to add fountains with some little pieces of wool, which is something you can do as well. And back on Infinity Craft, there's something you need to keep in mind in relation to your streets that's very important, and that's your sight lines. So when it comes to this big main street here, when you're walking down, I wanted to obstruct as much of your view as the Capitol building as possible until you reach about right here, when it starts to look very grand and impressive indeed. And that's to really get you to wander down into this courtyard here to get a better view of it. And that will lead you down this road, keeping you exploring the city. But now that you've got your build style, your build layout, and your build sightlines all figured out, the next thing you want to figure out is its purpose, because that can really influence some of the details you add into your building later. So for example, with this here Fisherman's Guild, I added this big crane here to make it seem like they'd be hauling up big barrels of fish from the harbor down below. Or for example, with this fortress here, I gave it big, sturdy stone foundations to imply that it's a lot more well built and stable than the buildings around it. But now it's time to put these things into effect here. So I want to add a building here to fill in this space, and I already know I have a style in mind. It's this sort of semi-fantasy medieval European building style that I really like, but now I need to define a purpose. And I want this to be a pottery shop selling the new pottery pots from the 1.20 update. So I think I want to have a shop down below and maybe some living quarters for the owner of the shop upstairs. And so I really only want it to be a 2-story building so that it doesn't really stick out too much against the rest of these. And then as you're laying out a foundation for your building, always try to avoid just using a simple square, because that's probably the worst shape you can use just for visual interest and variety, because it will always just end up looking so dull, and really your streets will end up looking far too straight, and your roofs will all end up looking really the same, because they're all just going to have the same shape and same roof line. So what I've decided to do here with this building to add a lot more depth and variety is A, I think I'm going to have a balcony there in that corner for the second floor, but B, I've also just added these little bits that poke out of the walls here to really add some depth to the walls, but also to make it so the roof is a lot more distinguished, because it will have two almost separate roofs from itself, which will look a lot more interesting than just a big rectangle. Because big slopey rectangles tend to look pretty uninteresting, which is fine in some cases, but I want this pottery shop to be a lot more visually interesting. But now that we've got a floor plan figured out, we need to pick out a block palette, and I like to do this in chunks. So right now I'm just going to pick out a block palette for the ground floor of this building. So I think I want to have some stone, cobblestone, stone bricks, andesite, and definitely also some polished andesite. And then I guess also probably some spruce stairs, slabs, and trapdoors. Oh my gosh, how could I forget spruce trapdoors? So something that I like to do when I'm building ground floors and foundations is I like to use the more processed blocks like polished andesite in the corners to make them feel a lot more sturdy. You definitely shouldn't be doing this every time, because if you just stack polished andesite, it tends to look kind of weird. But if you just break that up a bit, some stone and stone bricks, it can look like a really cool sort of fortified and sturdy texture. And because I don't imagine the downstairs to be too much of a display area, I imagine it to be more of a workshop, I don't think I'm going to be adding too many of these too high windows here, except for right in this area, because I think I'm going to put the kiln right here. So you'd want to be able to air out this area some, because it would be very hot. So yeah, if you're wanting your buildings to look like they make sense in real life, make sure you plan out where you're going to put windows and doors and that sort of thing, like you would in real life. You wouldn't want to have a big window facing another building. A, because that would just be sort of pointless on the whole look of your city, but B, it just wouldn't make sense in real life. And now I'm just going to use some spruce stairs, slabs, and trapdoors to create a design to allow the second floor to overhang a bit. And remember, you shouldn't be in a rush while you're building. because if you are, then you'll be able to tell with the final product. It won't come out to your standards and you probably won't be very happy with it. But now for the second floor, we're going to be using oak logs and white terracotta, as white terracotta isn't actually found anywhere else in this city, which will give this building a neat little visual distinction. And see, here's where these overhangs come in. They create a really neat visual atmosphere that, at least in this city, makes it look very dense and compact. In some other cities, it might not be the vibe you're going for, but in this one, I really want it to feel sort of like these alleyways off the streets are sort of cramped and dark, which adds an element of mystery for anyone who wants to explore them, making the whole city a lot more enticing to explore. And then before we finish up these walls here, I think I'm going to work on this chimney, because when you're building something like this, you always want to finish the things that are going to be difficult to build later first, so that you have an easier time constructing the whole building. And there, see how the white terracotta sort of stands out against the calcite and spruce? You can really notice, yeah, this building is a little bit different from the rest. Alright, but now that we have all the walls of our building figured out, how are we going to add some visual interest to the roof? Well, I think one of the best ways to do that is by using a block in your roof that completely contrasts with the rest of the build. So in this case, I think we're going to use a deep slate trim, and then for our filler, we're going to be using dark oak logs, spruce logs, and dark oak stairs. Okay, so first, how do we connect these two parts of our roof together using our fairly limited... Okay, and now I've framed out the roof here, and I know it looks like it can be challenging to construct a roof like this. It can be quite difficult, but once you get these angles right, the end result is so much more rewarding than just a simple rectangle. And then when you're adding in the filler blocks for your roof, I'd always recommend having some other texture or some other shape other than the stairs. And so here we're going to be using the logs just because it breaks up that stair shape. All right, there, yeah, see how this roof begins to take shape? And another thing you can do if you have a big stretch of roof that's just looking very boring is just add a little window set in there. It'll break up the shape quite well. And finally, for the building itself, after adding this balcony here, you can also add some stairs to the walls themselves to look like missing bricks. All right, but now that we have a structure for our building, what can we do to make it really feel like it's serving its intended purpose? In other words, for this building's case, what can we do to make it feel more like a pottery shop? Well, with the addition of pottery to Minecraft 1.20, there's actually quite a lot we can do. But before we add any sort of exterior details, we're just going to need to texture the ground a bit and make it a lot more suitable for what we're going to be adding. All right, so the first thing I think we're going to do is add some little shelves here, just holding up some pots, like this is an outdoor studio maybe for painting and things. Unfortunately, I don't actually have any pottery sherds on Infinity Craft, but I think that gets the job done. And then we'll just add in some slabs and fences to look like it's a little bit covered. But then one really neat looking and also pretty essential detail for houses like this in this sort of area is to add some flower boxes under the windows. And these could be made fairly simply by just having some grass surrounded in trapdoors, and then adding in some flowers on top of that. And this sort of thing leads into one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give for any build style. Doesn't matter if you're building in a desert or a plains biome, it's to keep your city green-ish. You don't want to just fill it with leaves and grass, because then it won't really give off those city vibes that I know a lot of you really like. So disperse some leaves around. Like over here, we have some leaves around all the buildings down here. Doesn't matter what type of leaves they are, they always look nice just surrounding your buildings, and it really gives just a pop of life and color to what can be a fairly dull color palette. And finally, one last trick you can do, which I completely stole from Joel Duggan using the Armor Stance data pack from Vanilla Tweaks, is create a really cool 3D sign effect. So all you have to do is click Show Arms, then click Item on Surface, and then mess with the positioning a bit. And here we are, folks. Together in this video, we've created this brand new, unique looking pottery shop building, which has a whole ton of detail, adds a bunch of neat sightlines to the city, and tells a really neat story, which is another one of your goals when you're building a big city such as this. And remember that every single building in this city started out just as this one, as a little wool plan on the ground. It really goes to show what a little bit of planning and careful consideration can do for a Minecraft build. But really, a city is just all built one building at a time, one block at a time. Anyway, folks, that just about does it for today's video. If you did enjoy, please consider subscribing to the channel, as it does help out a bunch. And this is actually a really new idea for me, at least. I haven't done these styles of video before, so if you have any tips for your cities. I'm really excited to see how you all build your cities. And also, if you just have any suggestions, anything in the video felt off, then just let me know, because again, I have no experience with doing this style of video. And as always, my name has been Void Doctor. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye for now.